This episode contains discussions about abduction, crime, and moral dilemmas that some listeners may find distressing. Listener discretion is advised. The year is 2054. The streets of Washington, D.C. are silent. Crime, they say, has been eradicated. But as the rain falls in this dark city, one man, once the protector of justice, runs for his life. His crime, a murder he has yet to commit. Welcome to the world of pre-crime, where the future is foretold and justice walks a razor-thin line. This is the story of John Anderton, a man who believed in the system until the system turned on him. Imagine a world where crime doesn't exist. Not because humanity has evolved beyond it, but because we found a way to stop it before it even happens. Sounds perfect, right? But what happens when the very system designed to protect you becomes the one hunting you? Today we unravel the haunting journey of John Anderton and the system that defined his life, pre-crime. Welcome back to Revenge and Madness, the podcast where we unravel the thin line between justice and insanity. Let's get started. To understand John Anderton's story, we first need to understand pre-crime. The system was revolutionary. 3 psychic beings, called precogs, could predict crimes before they occurred. Their visions were decoded by an intricate system, allowing law enforcement to arrest perpetrators before they even committed their crimes. The genius behind pre-crime was Dr. Iris Hinneman, a brilliant scientist who designed the technology to harness the precog's abilities. She envisioned a world free from violent crime, and her research became the foundation for pre-crime's success. However, as we'll discover, even Dr. Hinneman knew that the system wasn't perfect. The concept of pre-crime was born out of desperation. Rising crime rates had left law enforcement struggling to keep up. The government needed a drastic solution. Pre-crime was pitched as the future, an end to violence before it started. It was marketed as infallible, a perfect blend of science and law enforcement. But as we'll see, perfection is an illusion.
The precogs are never wrong. But occasionally, they do disagree.
Pre-crime was initially implemented as a pilot program in Washington, D.C. Early successes brought widespread praise. Politicians and citizens alike celebrated this system as a triumph of justice and technology. Crime rates plummeted, and for 6 years, the city remained crime-free. But while the public embraced pre-crime, few questioned the human cost. At the heart of the system were the precogs, Agatha, Arthur, and Dashiell. These 3 weren't just the backbone of pre-crime, they were its prisoners. Living in isolation, submerged in a sensory deprivation environment, their humanity stripped away for the sake of safety. Agatha, the strongest of the precogs, held a unique ability. Her visions were clearer, more accurate, but she was also the key to exposing pre-crime's darkest secret. Pre-crime created an illusion of perfection. However, this illusion masked the system's flaws and moral compromises, truths that would eventually come to light. At the center of pre-crime's operations was John Anderton, its chief in Washington, D.C. Brilliant, efficient, and deeply dedicated, Anderton was the embodiment of the system's success. But what drove him? 6 years before the events of his story, Anderton's 6-year-old son, Sean, was abducted while they were swimming together. Sean's disappearance shattered Anderton's world and left him drowning in guilt. He saw pre-crime as more than just a job. It was a crusade to prevent others from experiencing the same loss. Danny Whitwer, an agent from the Department of Justice, arrives in Washington to investigate pre-crime. He quickly becomes suspicious of the system's supposed perfection and begins to dig deeper. His presence sets the stage for the unraveling of the system's secrets.
There hasn't been a murder in 6 years. There's nothing wrong with the system. It is perfect. I agree.
Anderton's belief in pre-crime is absolute, until the unthinkable happens. During a routine analysis of a precog vision, he sees his own name. John Anderton is accused of murdering a man named Leo Crow, a complete stranger, in less than 36 hours. For the chief of pre-crime, it's a nightmare. How do you run from a system you helped build? But this wasn't a simple mistake. Anderton was being set up. Lamar Burgess, the very man in charge of pre-crime, orchestrated the entire thing to silence him. Burgess knew that Anderton was getting too close to uncovering a secret, one that would dismantle pre-crime's credibility forever. Leo Crow was nothing more than a pawn in Burgess's elaborate scheme. Anderton, once the enforcer of the system, had now become its scapegoat. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Pre-crime was designed to deliver justice, to stop crimes before they happened. But does that mean it's infallible? Anderton's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Can a person be punished for something they haven't done yet? Is it justice if free will is taken away? As Anderton delves deeper into the truth, he uncovers a critical flaw in pre-crime: the concept of the minority report. What if one precog sees a different future? What if the crime predicted isn't certain, but merely one possible outcome? For Anderton, this revelation is a lifeline. If free will exists, then he can change his future. But if the system is absolute, he's already guilty. This isn't just a story about technology. It's about morality. Are we willing to sacrifice individual freedom for collective safety? And at what cost? Consider this. Pre-crime success created a sense of security, but it also bred complacency. People stopped questioning the system, trusting it blindly. Does that sound familiar in our own world? How often do we trade privacy for convenience, or freedom for the illusion of safety? Anderton's journey leads him to Leo Crow's apartment, where his supposed crime is set to happen. But he wasn't alone. Agatha was with him, and unlike the automated reports pre-crime relied on, Agatha's presence provided real-time insight. She wasn't just predicting the murder. She was showing Anderton a choice. Meanwhile, Danny Whitwer uncovers that pre-crime isn't as infallible as it claims. He begins piecing together evidence that suggests Burgess is behind it all. In a dramatic confrontation, Anderton exposes Burgess's crimes, revealing how he had murdered Anne Lively to prevent her from reclaiming her daughter, Agatha, from the system. Anderton then forces Burgess into a choice that will define the fate of pre-crime.
You see the dilemma, don't you? If you don't kill me, precogs were wrong and pre-crime is over. If you do kill me, you go away. But it proves the system works. Precogs were right.
Trap. This episode contains discussions of violence, murder, and themes of revenge. Listener discretion is advised. Justice and revenge. Two sides of the same coin. But what happens when the system meant to protect you betrays you? Clyde Shelton wasn't always a monster. He was a father, a husband, a man who believed in the law. Until one brutal night shattered that belief forever. But Clyde's revenge wasn't just about making his enemies pay. No. His war was personal, relentless, and precise. It wasn't about one man's vengeance. It was about bringing the whole system to its knees. The question is, was he justified? Or had he become something far worse than the monsters he hunted? Clyde Shelton was a brilliant engineer, a devoted father, and a man who lived by the rules. He built security systems for the government, trusted the law, and believed in justice. But in a span of a few minutes, those rules meant nothing. His wife and daughter were stolen from him, murdered in cold blood, and then came the real betrayal. The legal system, meant to protect the innocent, failed him spectacularly. The murderer, Clarence Darby, walked away free after cutting a deal with prosecutor Nick Rice. A deal that let a monster roam the streets. A deal that told Clyde one thing: justice is a lie.
It's not what you know, Clyde, it's what you can prove in court.
And something else was born in his place. Something colder, smarter, deadlier. If justice wouldn't do its job, Clyde would make it do its job. On his terms, with his rules. Clyde's revenge wasn't reckless. It wasn't driven by blind rage. It was surgical. A decade in the making. He spent 10 years studying the justice system. Every loophole, every blind spot, every weakness. And then he made his first move. Clarence Darby, the man who had slaughtered Clyde's family, woke up in a nightmare of his own making. Chained down, helpless, facing the consequences that the court had denied him.
You can't fight fate. Right, Darby?
Clyde didn't just kill him. He dismantled him. Piece by piece. Darby wasn't just executed. He was erased. And with his death, Clyde sent a message. The system let me down, so I'm tearing it apart. And that was just the beginning. Clyde could have stopped there, but this was never about one man. Darby was just a symptom of a diseased system, and Clyde was ready to be the cure. So he did the unthinkable. He turned himself in. He let himself be arrested. A calculated move. Because now, Clyde was in the perfect position to tear down everything. One by one, those responsible for the corruption started dying. Judges, prosecutors, lawyers. No one was safe. From inside his prison cell, Clyde played puppet master, controlling the game while his enemies scrambled to stop him.
I'm going to bring the whole fucking diseased, corrupt temple down on your head. It's got to be biblical.
And with every move, he made one thing clear. This was not vengeance. This was justice, by his own design. Clyde Shelton didn't just wage war. He forced people to ask uncomfortable questions. Was he right? If the system failed him, was he justified in taking matters into his own hands? Or did his pursuit of justice become an excuse for destruction? If a system protects the guilty, do the innocent have the right to destroy it? Where does justice end and vengeance begin? In the end, Clyde's war came with a price. Nick Rice, the man he once saw as an enemy, finally outmaneuvered him. In his final act, Clyde sat alone in his prison cell, watching as his final plan was undone.
I'm doing the right thing, Nick. You just have to see it that way. By murdering all those people, all you're doing is destroying the memory of your daughter and causing the same pain that you're suffering from.
Nick set the final trap, one that Clyde didn't see coming. The bomb, meant to take out his enemies, detonated right under him. Clyde Shelton's war ended in fire. So here's the final question. Was Clyde a hero or a villain? Did he expose the system's flaws or simply prove that violence breeds more violence? His war ended, but the echoes remain. Justice is still flawed. Corruption still exists. And somewhere out there, another Clyde Shelton might be waiting, watching, deciding if they too should burn it all down. Where does the line truly lie between justice and madness? This episode contains discussions about law enforcement, crime, and moral dilemmas. Listener discretion is advised. 2 men, 2 enforcers, 2 visions of justice. One wields brute force in a world where crime was wiped out, yet lawlessness still lurks in the shadows. The other, a walking sentence in a city where mercy is extinct. John Spartan and Judge Dredd are legends of their time, both feared and revered. But when law and order are defined by force, what separates justice from judgment? Welcome to Revenge and Madness, the podcast where we unravel the thin line between justice and vengeance. Today, we're diving into the stories of 2 lawmen, John Spartan and Judge Dredd. 2 men, 2 futures, and 2 very different approaches to justice. Let's begin. Before the world froze him, John Spartan was a name criminals feared. A LAPD officer in the late 20th century. He had a reputation for being a wrecking ball in a uniform. He didn't just catch criminals, he annihilated them. His methods were unconventional. His tactics, extreme. But in a world overrun by crime, Spartan was the city's last line of defense. And then came Simon Phoenix, a criminal mastermind unlike any Spartan had ever faced. Ruthless, cunning, and completely unpredictable. Their battles left the city in ruins, collateral damage stacking up higher with every encounter. But it was their final confrontation in 1996 that changed everything. A hostage situation, a burning building, dozens of innocent people at risk. Spartan did what Spartan does best. He charged in. He stopped Phoenix, but when the smoke cleared, something was different this time. 30 hostages were dead, and John Spartan, the so-called hero, was blamed.
What can I say? I'm a blast from the past.
Convicted of reckless endangerment and manslaughter, he was sentenced to cryogenic prison. And with that, the world moved on. Until it didn't. Fast forward to the 22nd century. A world overrun by crime. where cities have become sprawling mega metropolises. Law and order are nearly extinct, and only one force keeps society from complete collapse: the judges. Among them, one name reigns supreme: Judge Dredd. Dredd isn't just a cop. He is the law itself. In Mega City 1, where crime is an epidemic, judges act as judge, jury, and executioner. There is no trial, no appeals, no leniency. If you break the law, Dredd decides your fate on the spot.
Law is not the law. I am the law.
For Dredd, there is no room for second chances. Justice is absolute. His duty isn't to question the law, it's to enforce it. But when you take away choice, when justice is instant and final, does it stop being justice? Spartan and Dredd, two warriors, two enforcers, two interpretations of justice. But how do they compare? Both are shaped by violent worlds that demand strong enforcers. They are relentless in their pursuit of criminals, showing no hesitation when faced with danger. Their presence alone is enough to make criminals think twice. They are both respected and feared, yet both find themselves in conflict with the very systems they serve. But the differences between them are stark. Spartan is a soldier of the past, forced into a future that doesn't want him. He is raw, emotional, and guided by instinct rather than strict protocol. He believes that some rules need to be broken for the greater good. He fights a society that has abandoned its own ability to fight back. Dredd, on the other hand, is a product of a world where the law is absolute. He does not bend the rules because in his mind, the rules are what keeps society from descending into chaos. There is no hesitation, no mercy, no personal attachment, only law and punishment.
Look, you can't take away people's right to be assholes.
This isn't a negotiation. The sentence is death.
Both Spartan and Dredd exist in worlds that demand order. But their methods raise a fundamental question. What kind of justice should exist? Spartan represents justice through emotion, believing in free will, even if it gets messy. Dredd represents justice as an absolute, where you break the law, you pay the price, no exceptions. Which is more dangerous? A world where law is too soft, or one where law is too harsh? What happens wherein a society gives too much power to its enforcers? John Spartan and Judge Dredd are both warriors in worlds that demand order. But at what cost? If you had to choose, would you rather be protected by a man who believes in second chances, or a man who never gives them? Their stories force us to ask deeper questions about justice, authority, and control. In today's world, where debates over law enforcement and power continue to divide societies, which model do we truly lean toward? The compassionate officer willing to bend the rules for the greater good, or the absolute judge who upholds the law at any cost? Thank you for joining us on Revenge and Madness. Next time, we dissect another figure walking the thin line between justice and vengeance. Until then, remember, justice and madness are only a heartbeat away. This episode contains discussions about war, violence, government control, and moral ambiguity. Listener discretion is advised. Two men draped in red, white, and blue. Both served their country. Both were chosen to represent America. But while one became a blunt instrument of the state, the other became its darkest reflection. John F. Walker and Edward Blake are two sides of the same coin. Symbols of power, patriotism, and control. But when does the American dream turn into a nightmare? Walker, the soldier desperate to live up to the impossible expectations of Captain America, was pushed to his breaking point by pressures of war and duty. Blake, a man who abandoned all illusions of heroism, embraced the violence and corruption at the heart of power. Both wore the colors of their country, but neither truly stood for what those colors were supposed to mean. Welcome to Revenge and Madness, the podcast where we unravel the thin line between justice and vengeance. Today, we examine the lives of two government operatives, John Walker, the soldier turned U.S. agent, and Edward Blake, the ruthless enforcer known as the Comedian. Both fought for their country, both carried out its will, but only one ever questioned it. Let's begin. John Walker's story isn't just about war. It's about the weight of a legacy. When the government needed a replacement for Steve Rogers, they didn't look for the next great leader. They looked for the next great soldier. Walker had everything a perfect soldier needed: strength, discipline, and the ability to follow orders without hesitation. But unlike Steve Rogers, Walker wasn't chosen for his heart or his unwavering moral compass. He was chosen for his ability to kill efficiently and execute orders without question. The title of Captain America came with expectations that Walker was never built to meet. The public demanded a hero. The government demanded obedience. Walker tried to be both. But as the pressures mounted, his flaws, his rage, his arrogance, his need to prove himself began to surface, and the burden of being America's symbol was way too much for him.
You don't want to do this.
Yeah, we do.
And then he made a choice that changed everything. In a fit of rage, after losing his best friend in combat, Walker took the shield, the very symbol of America, and used it as an instrument of execution. The world watched in horror as Captain America, their supposed hero, brutally murdered a man in broad daylight. The shield was meant to protect, but Walker turned it into a weapon of vengeance. And in that moment, he wasn't Captain America anymore. He was something else. Before John Walker became the government's violent tool, there was Edward Blake, the man who saw the world for what it really was and laughed. Blake was a soldier, a government enforcer, an assassin. He did what no one else would. The missions that had to be done, but couldn't be acknowledged. They were his specialty. Overthrowing governments, eliminating threats, silencing dissent. These weren't mistakes or accidents. They were policy. But unlike Walker, who fought to live up to an ideal, Blake never cared about ideals. He never believed in the American dream. He knew it was a lie. He saw firsthand the corruption at every level of power, and instead of fighting against it, he embraced it. He became a soldier who understood that morality was an illusion. Power was the only thing that mattered.
It's a joke. It's all a joke.
To Blake, the world wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was meant to. He didn't kill out of anger, revenge, or duty. He killed because that's how the world operated, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But even the darkest men have a line. And when Blake uncovered a secret too horrifying for even him, he realized he wasn't laughing anymore. Blake saw the truth. The world he thought he understood was even worse than he imagined, and it cost him his life. Walker and Blake were both soldiers, both killers, both tools of a larger system. But their key difference? Walker wanted to be a hero. Blake never believed in heroes. Walker struggled under the weight of his role. He wanted to do the right thing, but his anger, his training, and his own need for validation pushed him too far. When he lost Captain America's shield, he lost everything he was supposed to stand for. Blake, on the other hand, never fought for ideals. He fought for survival. He accepted that war is brutal, that morality is an illusion, and that power is what shapes history. He didn't need a symbol. He was the symbol of how power truly operates.
You built me.
What happened to the American dream? It came true. You're looking at it.
Both men embodied American strength. But while Walker struggled with his role, Blake reveled in it. Walker and Blake force us to ask a difficult question. When does patriotism become dangerous? Both were government operatives. Both did what they were told. And both ultimately became monsters shaped by the system that created them. Walker wanted to uphold Captain America's ideals, but fell victim to his own flaws. Blake understood that America wasn't about ideals. It was about power. One fought against the system and was cast aside. The other accepted the system and became one of its most dangerous enforcers. So what happens when a country creates men like these? Can they ever be controlled? Or does the system create its own destruction? Walker and Blake were both instruments of power. But while one was a failed hero, the other was the embodiment of cruelty disguised as duty. Their stories challenge us to ask, when does justice become control? When does patriotism become a weapon? And when does power stop serving people and start consuming them? Thank you for joining us on Revenge and Madness. Next time, we'll take another deep dive into the minds of those who blur the line between justice and vengeance. Until then, remember, the difference between justice and madness is only a matter of perspective. This episode contains discussions about graphic violence, vigilantism, trauma, and moral dilemmas. Listener discretion is advised. Gotham, New York, two cities plagued by crime, where justice is often another word for vengeance. In the darkest corners of these cities, two men wage war, not with ideals, but with bullets, brutality, and an unyielding will to destroy those who prey on the innocent. One is the Grim Knight, an alternate Batman who abandoned restraint and embraced total war. The other is Frank Castle, the one-man army known as the Punisher. When two of the deadliest vigilantes in comic book history collide, only one walks away. Tonight, we break down the strengths, weapons, and tactics of these two executioners. Who has the deadlier arsenal? Who has the superior strategy? And in the end, who truly defines justice? Every vigilante has an origin, a moment that transforms him from a man into a force of vengeance. But the Grim Knight and the Punisher didn't just cross the line, they erased it. The Grim Knight was born from a single choice. What if Bruce Wayne picked up the gun that killed his parents? In his world, young Bruce executed Joe Chill on the spot. That one pull of the trigger led him down a path where he abandoned Batman's morality and embraced lethal force. Trained by the best assassins, mercenaries, and warlords, he became a version of Batman unshackled by restraint. He didn't just fight crime, he eradicated it. He weaponized Gotham, turning it into a city under permanent surveillance, where criminals had no place to hide. To the Grim Knight, justice isn't about hope, it's about total control. Frank Castle, on the other hand, was a soldier before he became a war. A decorated Marine, Castle returned home only to see his family gunned down in a mob hit. The system failed him. The law let the killers walk, and that's when the Punisher was born. Unlike other vigilantes, Frank never pretended to be a hero. He doesn't seek redemption, only retribution. If you're in his crosshairs, you don't get a second chance. To the Punisher, justice isn't blind. It's the barrel of a gun aimed at the guilty. And the advantage here goes to the Grim Knight. Both men are relentless, but the Grim Knight has resources that Frank can only dream of. His version of Gotham was locked down like a military state, and his ability to manipulate technology and surveillance gives him the upper hand in preparation. When it comes to hand-to-hand combat, both of these men are highly skilled, but they fight in very different ways. The Grim Knight was trained by the League of Shadows, mercenaries, and some of the most brutal combat masters on Earth. He fights with precision, leveraging multiple martial arts styles. Unlike Bruce Wayne, he doesn't hesitate. Every move is calculated for maximum lethality. He blends stealth, misdirection, and pure aggression, preferring to take enemies down before they even know he's there. The Punisher fights with raw brutality. As a Marine, he was trained in military hand-to-hand combat, Krav Maga, and close-quarter battle techniques. Frank is a brawler, capable of using anything in his environment as a weapon. He can take extreme punishment and keep going, using sheer willpower to push through injuries that would drop other men. The Punisher doesn't fight with finesse. He fights to end you, and that advantage goes to the Punisher. The Grim Knight is a better technician, but Frank Castle has the endurance and adaptability that make him an unstoppable force. In a straight-up fight, Frank's willingness to take damage and keep moving forward makes him more dangerous in a prolonged combat. Both of these men are walking armories, but their approaches to firepower couldn't be any more different. The Grim Knight has an arsenal that would make any government jealous. He has access to high-tech bat gadgets, military-grade firearms, drones, and explosives. His bat suit is modified with ballistic protection, and he carries custom-built weapons designed for silent and efficient takedowns. He fights with surgical precision, using advanced tracking and stealth technology to eliminate targets before they see him coming. The Punisher, on the other hand, is a walking war zone. He carries everything from handguns to rocket launchers, preferring brute force over subtlety. His weapon of choice is the M4 carbine, but he's also been known to use grenade launchers, sniper rifles, and whatever heavy artillery he can get his hands on. Unlike the Grim Knight, Frank doesn't care about cleanup. If he has to blow up an entire building to take down his target, so be it. While the Grim Knight is tactical, the Punisher is pure overwhelming force. And that advantage goes to the Grim Knight. Frank Castle carries more raw firepower, but the Grim Knight's ability to weaponize his entire environment gives him a massive edge. From drones to thermal imaging, he controls the battlefield before the first shot is fired. Both of these men are master strategists, but their methods differ in execution. The Grim Knight is a planner. He believes in controlling every possible outcome, setting traps, and monitoring every inch of his territory. He sees crime like a chessboard, moving pieces until his enemies are exactly where he wants them. If you're in his sights, he's already 3 steps ahead. The Punisher is a tactician, but he thrives in chaos. Frank adapts in real time, using his military experience to react to shifting threats on the fly. He doesn't need the perfect setup. He is the perfect setup. He fights like he has nothing to lose because, in his mind, he doesn't. And that advantage goes to the Grim Knight. Both men are brilliant strategists, but the Grim Knight's ability to predict and manipulate his enemies gives him the edge in a prolonged war. So what happens when the Grim Knight and the Punisher go to war? In a neutral battleground, Frank would push forward relentlessly, while the Grim Knight would pick him apart from the shadows. The battle would be a game of survival, brutal, unrelenting, and leaving neither man unscathed. But the Grim Knight has one final edge: preparation. Frank Castle is a force of nature, but the Grim Knight's ability to control the battlefield means that in the end, the bat prevails. So your winner here is the Grim Knight. Two men, two warriors, two different philosophies of justice. The Grim Knight proves that power, when wielded with precision, is nearly unstoppable. But there is one thing that we know about the Punisher. It's that he never truly stays down. Thank you for joining us on Revenge and Madness. Who should we break down next? Let us know, and remember, justice isn't always blind. Sometimes it's armed to the teeth. This episode contains discussions about abuse, trauma, and revenge. Listener discretion is advised. There are two kinds of people in this world: those who take what they want, and those who refuse to let them. Some call it justice, others call it revenge. But what happens when the system meant to protect you turns against you? When the people in power exploit, control, and erase you? And what happens when the victims fight back, and fights back harder than they ever expected? Elizabeth Salander was never supposed to win. They called her unstable, a problem to be controlled, a girl too broken to have a voice. But they didn't realize one thing: Elizabeth was watching, learning, and when the time came, she didn't just expose them. She burned their whole world to the ground. This is Revenge and Madness, and today we unravel the story of Elizabeth Salander, the girl with the dragon tattoo, the girl who fought back. Elizabeth Salander's story is not just one of survival. It is a story of rebellion against a system designed to silence her. She was born into a world of violence, where the people meant to protect her either looked the other way or became her worst enemies. Her father, Alexander Zalichenko, was a brutal Soviet defector turned informant, protected by the very government that ignored his crimes. Her mother, trapped in an abusive relationship, was powerless to stop him. Elizabeth didn't wait for someone to save her. At 12 years old, she fought back the only way she knew how. She set her father on fire. Instead of being seen as a victim, she was institutionalized, declared legally incompetent, and placed under guardianship. From that moment, she learned a harsh lesson. Justice doesn't come from the system. It had to be taken. She was stripped of her rights, her independence controlled by a series of corrupt men who saw her as nothing more than a problem to be managed. But Elizabeth was more than they realized. She was watching, learning, and she was preparing to make them pay. Elizabeth Salander is not your typical Avenger. She isn't out to save the world or fix the broken system. Her actions are not about law or morality. They are about survival. She exists in the gray area between justice and revenge, punishing those who abuse their power, not because it's the right thing to do, but because they left her no other choice. Her greatest weapon isn't strength or brute force. It's intelligence. As a world-class hacker, Elizabeth has access to secrets that can destroy lives. And when she decides someone needs to be taken down, she does it with precision. Take, for example, Nils Bjorman, her corrupt legal guardian. He thought she was powerless. He used his authority to violate her, believing he would get away with it. But Elizabeth doesn't just fight back. She makes sure he will never hold power over another woman again. She tattoos the words, "I am a rapist pig," across his body, ensuring that every time he looks in the mirror, he is forced to face what he is. This isn't just revenge, it's a warning. A statement that the victim he tried to silence will never be ignored again. Elizabeth doesn't fight fair, she fights to win. Elizabeth's war doesn't stop at one corrupt man. She takes on institutions, entire systems built to protect the powerful while crushing the vulnerable. In The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, she partners with journalist Mikhail Blomkvist to uncover the dark secrets of the Vonger family. What starts as an investigation into a missing girl turns into the exposure of a serial killer, a man protected by his wealth and status. Elizabeth doesn't hesitate. She hacks. She manipulates. She digs until the truth can no longer be buried. But her fight becomes even more personal in The Girl Who Played with Fire and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest. She learns that the people who institutionalized her as a child were covering up for her father's crimes. When she is shot, buried alive, and left for dead, she refuses to be a victim. She claws her way back, not just to survive, but to destroy the men who thought they had won. And she doesn't just take revenge. She outsmarts them. In the final battle, it's not violence that wins. It's her mind. In a courtroom filled with people who once called her unstable, she exposes the entire conspiracy against her. She forces them to see her, not as the broken girl they tried to erase, but as the woman who took them down. Elizabeth Salander is unlike any other character in fiction. She is not a hero. She is not a villain. She is something else entirely. A survivor who refused to be controlled. Her trauma shaped her, but it never defined her. She doesn't just live with PTSD. She turned it into fuel. She is emotionally closed off, deeply distrustful, and often ruthless. But underneath her hardened exterior, there is loyalty. There is a sense of justice, her own version of it. She will go to war for the few she lets in, and she will burn entire institutions to the ground to protect them. But the question remains, can Elizabeth ever truly heal, or is she destined to be at war forever? Elizabeth Salander is more than just a character. She is a force, a reckoning, a living reminder that the people society tries to silence are often the ones with the most to say. In a world where power is currency, and the vulnerable are often ignored, disbelieved, or dismissed, Elizabeth fights back, not for justice, not for glory, but simply because she refuses to be anyone's victim. She doesn't seek to change the system, nor does she believe in noble crusades. She fights for herself, but in doing so, she becomes something more, a symbol of defiance, a question mark on the very concept of power and control. And perhaps, most importantly, a reminder that survival is its own kind of justice. But let's be real. Elizabeth Salander is not your traditional hero. She doesn't save the innocent or fight for the greater good. She's ruthless, calculated, and capable of extreme violence when pushed. So where does that leave us? What does that say about a world where survival demands such brutality? And what does it say about us that we find ourselves rooting for her? Is Elizabeth Salander a hero? Or is she simply a survivor, forged by the very cruelty she's had to endure? And at the end of the day, does it even matter? Thank you for joining us on Revenge and Madness, where survival isn't just a choice, it's a war. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, share, and tell me, who should we break down next? Who walks that razor-thin line between justice and madness? Until next time, remember this. When the world comes for you, when it tries to break you piece by piece, you have two choices. You can bend, or you can break it right back. This episode contains discussions of violence, trauma, and coercion. Listener discretion is advised. 2 assassins, 2 warriors forged in secrecy, trained to strike from the shadows. One was created by the Red Room, an elite Black Widow operative with a talent for deception and lethality, Yelena Belova. The other was raised in the shadow of a legend, carrying the legacy of her mother and redefining justice in her own way, Silk Spectre. Both are deadly, both are brilliant, but only one can emerge victorious. Tonight, we break down their skills, weapons, and mindsets. Who has the superior combat training? Who has the deadlier arsenal? And in the end, who wins when the world's deadliest spy faces off against a legacy vigilante? Every assassin has an origin, a defining moment that transforms them into a force of nature. Yelena and Silk Spectre too both inherited their roles, but the paths they walk couldn't be more different. Yelena Belova was created for this life. Trained from childhood in the Red Room, she was engineered to be the perfect Black Widow, just like Natasha Romanoff before her. But where Natasha sought redemption, Yelena embraced the brutality of her training. Cold, precise, and unpredictable, she became one of the deadliest operatives in the world, striking from the shadows and eliminating her targets without hesitation. Unlike Natasha, she doesn't hesitate, she executes. To Yelena, the mission isn't a question of morality, it's a matter of efficiency. Silk Spectre, too, Laurie Jaspesic, was born into it. As the daughter of the original Silk Spectre, she grew up surrounded by masked heroes, but her path was anything but straightforward. Trained by her mother and shaped by a world that didn't always welcome heroes, she developed a unique blend of strength, combat prowess, and strategic thinking. But Laurie isn't just a fighter, she's a survivor, using her wit and experience to outmaneuver opponents and strike where it hurts the most. To Silk Spectre, fighting isn't about orders, it's about control. And with that, the advantage goes to Yelena Belova. Both women are deadly, but Yelena was built for this life from the ground up. Her training, discipline, and sheer ruthlessness gives her the edge in preparation and execution. When it comes to hand-to-hand combat, both Yelena and Silk Spectre are highly skilled, but they fight in very different ways. Yelena Belova's fighting style is precise, brutal, and efficient. She was trained in multiple martial arts, specializing in grappling, joint manipulation, and lethal strikes. Her movements are calculated, designed to incapacitate an enemy in the shortest time possible. She has the agility of a Black Widow, the ruthlessness of an assassin, and the adaptability of a spy. Silk Spectre is an unpredictable brawler. She uses a combination of boxing, kickboxing, and street fighting techniques to overwhelm her opponents. Unlike Yelena, who fights with deadly precision, Laurie uses raw power and adaptability, turning the tide of a fight through sheer will and intelligence. She doesn't just hit hard, she hits smart. Yelena is a surgeon with a scalpel. Laurie is a street fighter with a hammer. And the advantage here goes to Silk Spectre. Yelena is more refined in her technique, but Laurie's unpredictability, adaptability, and sheer resilience make her dangerous in a prolonged fight. If the battle goes the distance, Laurie has the edge. Both women have operated in the shadows, but when it comes to deception, one has a clear advantage. Yelena is a master of infiltration, disguise, and psychological warfare. As a Black Widow, she was trained to blend into any environment, manipulate targets, and strike before they ever realize she's there. She can vanish into a crowd, assume new identities on the fly, and use deception as effectively as violence. Silk Spectre, on the other hand, is no stranger to deception, but her strength lies in manipulation through charisma rather than covert espionage. She knows how to read people, twist the situation in her favor, and use her presence to command attention. But compared to Yelena, she lacks deep cover training of a spy. Silk Spectre can play the game, but Yelena wrote the rulebook, so the advantage here goes to Yelena Belova. Laurie is a master of psychological manipulation, but Yelena's ability to infiltrate, deceive, and execute a plan with military precision gives her the upper hand in a stealth-paced encounter. When the gloves come off, who has the deadlier arsenal? Yelena comes armed with military-grade weaponry, firearms, knives, explosives, and widow gadgets designed for silent, efficient kills. She doesn't just fight, she neutralizes threats before they ever become a problem. Silk Spectre, by contrast, relies on traditional combat tools, knives, batons, and her fists. While she is deadly with her bare hands, her arsenal lacks the high-tech precision of Yelena's. Laurie fights with raw power. Yelena fights with an armory. So with that, our advantage goes to Yelena Belova. Laurie's strength lies in hand-to-hand combat, but Yelena's access to high-tech weaponry and assassination tools gives her the firepower advantage. So what happens when Yelena Belova and Silk Spectre go to war? In an all-out battle, it's a clash of precision and adaptability. Laurie would push forward, trying to break Yelena with sheer willpower, while Yelena would set traps, control the battlefield, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. But in a prolonged engagement, Yelena's superior training, weapons, and deception give her the final edge. Laurie is a survivor, but Yelena was born to kill. And with that, our winner this time is Yelena Belova. 2 warriors, 2 assassins, 2 different philosophies of battle. Silk Spectre proves that experience, adaptability, and resilience can turn the tide of any fight. But Yelena Belova shows that when the mission is survival, precision wins the day. Thank you for joining us on Revenge and Madness. Who should we break down next? Let us know. And remember, in the world of assassins, hesitation is the difference between life and death.